What if the carrier making China nervous is not American at all? And what if its real power comes from a hidden connection between Washington and Paris that most people never notice? Before we go deeper, tap like if you enjoy serious military stories, subscribe if you want the truth behind global power, and share this video with one person who still thinks aircraft carriers are just big ships with planes on top. Because this story is not only about steel, reactors, jets, or missiles. It is about a quiet naval partnership that gives the West something China cannot ignore. On paper, France has only one aircraft carrier. China has a growing navy, huge shipyards, new carriers, long-range missiles, and a plan to push American power away from the Western Pacific. So at first glance, the French carrier should not matter much. It is smaller than an American supercarrier. It carries fewer aircraft. It cannot launch planes at the same speed as a Nimitz or Ford-class carrier. And when it goes into maintenance, France has no second nuclear carrier waiting in reserve. But that simple view misses the real point. The French carrier Charles de Gaulle is not dangerous because it is the biggest ship at sea. It is dangerous because it is nuclear-powered, catapult-equipped, combat-tested, and built to speak the same naval language as the United States Navy. That is what changes the equation. China does not only worry about one ship. China worries about networks. China worries about allies that can plug into the American system. China worries about any Western Navy that can operate far from home, launch modern fighters, coordinate with American strike groups, and keep pressure on key sea lanes from the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean and into the Pacific. And that is exactly where France becomes more important than many people realize. The Charles de Gaulle is the only nuclear-powered aircraft carrier outside the United States that uses catapults and arresting gear. That sentence sounds technical, but it is huge. Most countries that build aircraft carriers use ski jumps or short takeoff designs. Those ships can be useful, but they face limits. A catapult carrier can launch heavier aircraft. It can send planes into the air with more fuel, more weapons, and more flexibility. It can operate airborne early warning aircraft, which are essential for seeing threats far beyond the horizon. It can conduct a style of naval aviation much closer to the American model. That means the Charles de Gaulle is not just a symbol of French pride. It is a bridge. It connects European naval power to the American way of fighting at sea. And in a crisis, that bridge matters. Imagine a tense moment in the Indo-Pacific. Chinese warships are moving near Taiwan. Submarines are hunting in deep water. Missile batteries are watching every major route. Satellites are passing overhead. Every country in the region is trying to guess what happens next. Now imagine that an American carrier is not alone. Nearby, a French nuclear carrier is operating with Rafale marine fighters, E-2 Hawkeye radar aircraft, escorts, submarines, and support ships. Its aircraft can coordinate with American aircraft. Its officers understand American carrier procedures. Its flight deck can receive certain Allied aircraft in cross-deck operations. Its communications are built for coalition warfare. Suddenly, the problem facing China is not one navy. It is a system of navies. That is why this story matters. The Charles de Gaulle was born from a French dream of independence. France has always had a complicated relationship with American power. It is an ally, but not a follower. It wants to be part of the Western camp, but it also wants the ability to act on its own. After the Second World War, France rebuilt its military identity around one core idea: never be helpless again. That idea shaped its nuclear weapons program, it shaped its submarine force, it shaped its aerospace industry, and it shaped the decision to build a nuclear aircraft carrier. Construction began in the late Cold War, during a time when Europe still feared Soviet power, but also knew the world was changing. France wanted a ship that could carry its national will across oceans. Not a floating museum, not a coastal defense platform, a real power projection tool. The result was Charles de Gaulle, named after the leader who symbolized French resistance and national independence. But here is the paradox. To build a carrier that could act independently, France had to accept deep cooperation with the United States. The ship's catapult and arresting systems came from the American tradition of carrier aviation. French pilots and landing signal officers had to learn skills that the U.S. Navy had spent decades perfecting. Carrier landings are not normal landings. They are controlled crashes on a moving runway. At night, in bad weather, with fuel running low, a pilot must hit a tiny landing area on a ship that is rising, falling, and turning with the sea. There is no room for ego. There is no room for improvisation. The system must be learned, repeated, and trusted. That is why training with the Americans became so important. The French did not just buy equipment. They entered a culture of naval aviation. They absorbed procedures. They built compatibility. They learned how to operate inside a world where seconds matter. Radio calls matter, deck discipline matters, and one mistake can kill people. This is the hidden power of the Charles de Gaulle. It is French in flag, crew, aircraft, and command, but it is also linked to the American carrier ecosystem. For China, that link is more threatening than the ship's size, because size is only one form of power. Interoperability is another. The Charles de Gaulle displaces around 42,000 tons at full load. That is much smaller than an American supercarrier, which can exceed 100,000 tons. An American carrier can carry more aircraft, launch faster, absorb more punishment, and maintain a higher tempo of operations. No serious analyst would claim that the French carrier equals a U.S. Ford-class carrier. It does not, but that comparison can be misleading. A knife is not a hammer. A smaller carrier can still be deadly if it is used in the right place, at the right time, with the right support. France built a compact nuclear strike platform. It is not meant to replace the United States Navy. It is meant to extend Western reach. That is why the ship's limitations do not make it irrelevant. They make its design more interesting. The Charles de Gaulle is about trade-offs. Its smaller deck limits simultaneous operations. It cannot launch and recover aircraft with the same rhythm as a larger American ship. Its air wing is smaller, often built around Rafale marine fighters, E-2C Hawkeye radar planes, and helicopters. Its nuclear reactors also require periodic major maintenance, which can take the ship out of service for long stretches. That creates a major strategic problem for France. When your country has only one carrier, maintenance is not just maintenance. It is a temporary loss of a national instrument. When the ship is in dry dock, French carrier aviation loses its sea-based home. Pilots must find ways to keep skills sharp, often by working with allies. The Navy must manage a gap in presence. Politicians lose a visible tool of pressure. This is the price of having one unique carrier instead of a large fleet. But when the Charles de Gaulle is available, it gives France something most countries do not have. It gives France the ability to move a sovereign airbase without asking permission from a foreign country. That matters in war. It matters in diplomacy. It matters when bases are unavailable, airspace is closed, or regional governments hesitate. A carrier does not solve every problem, but it gives leaders options. And in geopolitics, options are power. If this breakdown is already making you see aircraft carriers differently, do one small thing for the channel. Hit the like button like you are launching a jet from the deck, subscribe before the next wave of analysis arrives, and send this video to a friend who would rather understand the map before the crisis starts. Now let's talk about the nuclear part, because it is more than a headline. Nuclear propulsion changes the behavior of a warship. A conventional carrier depends heavily on fuel for movement. It needs tankers. It must plan around refueling. It is tied to logistics in a visible way. A nuclear carrier still needs food, aviation fuel, weapons, spare parts, and maintenance, but its propulsion gives it endurance. It can sail long distances at high speed without constantly worrying about fuel for the ship itself. That means it can appear in distant waters and stay engaged longer than many rivals expect. For France, a nuclear carrier fits its larger nuclear identity. France is one of the world's nuclear weapon states. It has ballistic missile submarines. It has air-launched nuclear capability. It has built its security doctrine around independent deterrence. The Charles de Gaulle is not the main pillar of that nuclear deterrent, but it belongs to the same strategic culture. It tells the world that France refuses to be a purely regional power. It tells rivals that Paris can send force far beyond Europe. And it tells allies that France can contribute something rare. But the heart of the story is not only what France can do alone, it is what France can do with the United States. Modern naval war is no longer about a single ship fighting a single ship. It is about sensors, satellites, submarines, drones, electronic warfare, air defense networks, long-range missiles, and command systems. The ocean may look empty, but in a real crisis, it becomes an invisible battlefield full of signals. Who sees first? Who jams first? Who fires first? Who survives the first wave? China has spent years building what military analysts call anti-access and area denial capability. In simple terms, that means China wants to make it dangerous for enemy forces to operate near its coast. It has anti-ship ballistic missiles, it has cruise missiles, it has submarines, it has land-based aircraft, it has radar networks and surveillance systems, it has artificial islands and expanding naval bases. The goal is clear: push American carriers farther away, make intervention costly, convince allies that the United States cannot safely enter the fight. This is where Allied naval power becomes so important. If China only has to track one American carrier group, the problem is hard but focused. If China has to track American carriers, French carrier operations, British carrier deployments, Japanese naval movements, Australian submarines, Indian exercises, and NATO-linked activity in the Indian Ocean, the problem becomes more complex. Every added partner creates more uncertainty. Every extra deck creates more planning problems. Every compatible navy increases the chance that the West can rotate pressure, share intelligence, and keep sea lanes open. The Charles de Gaulle is especially valuable because it can bring fixed-wing naval aviation into that Allied picture. France has already used the carrier in real combat. After the attacks of September 11th, France deployed the carrier to support operations in Afghanistan. French aircraft flew missions over long distances from the sea. The ship later supported operations over Libya. It also played a role in strikes against ISIS. These missions gave French naval aviation real experience, not just parade experience. That matters. A carrier crew that has operated in war learns lessons that cannot be learned from brochures. Pilots learn the stress of real missions. Deck crews learn the pressure of sustained operations. Commanders learn how communications, logistics, weather, politics, and danger all collide. Combat experience gives credibility, and credibility is exactly what makes a ship useful in deterrence. Deterrence is not just about having weapons. It is about making the other side believe you can use them. China watches these things. China studies Western exercises. Chinese analysts examine carrier deployments, aircraft types, escort ships, and logistics patterns. They look for weakness. They look for political division. They look for signs that Europe will stay home if a crisis erupts in Asia. So when a French carrier group sails into the Indo-Pacific, it sends a message larger than its tonnage. It says Europe has interests there. It says the Indian Ocean and Pacific are not private waters. It says France, with territories and citizens in the region, is not an outsider. Many people forget this. France is not just a European country with a navy. France has overseas territories across the world. It has territory in the Indian Ocean and the Pacific. It has citizens, economic zones, and military responsibilities far from Paris. That gives France a direct reason to care about Indo-Pacific security. For Beijing, this matters because it complicates the story. China often frames outside military presence in the region as foreign interference. But France can say, we are already an Indo-Pacific nation. That argument gives French deployments political weight. It also gives Washington something useful, an allied carrier force that does not look like a purely American move. This is the soft power of hard power. A French carrier in the region can support American strategy while preserving a separate French voice. That may sound subtle, but diplomacy often works through subtle differences. Some countries may be nervous about openly joining an American-led military posture against China, but they may welcome French participation in exercises, port visits, and maritime security missions. France can open doors that America sometimes cannot. At the same time, the carrier's American-compatible systems make sure that if a crisis becomes serious, the French force can work with the U.S. Navy. That combination is powerful. Independent flag, compatible machinery, shared procedures, common threat picture. This is why the U.S.-France carrier relationship is not a weakness. It is a strategic design. Of course, there are limits. The French carrier does not have the same electronic warfare strength as an American carrier air wing. The U.S. Navy operates specialized electronic attack aircraft like the EA-18G Growler. These aircraft can jam enemy radars, disrupt air defense networks, and protect strike packages. France does not have an exact carrier-based equivalent. The Rafale Marine is a superb multi-role fighter. It has strong sensors, weapons, and self-protection systems. It can fight in the air, strike targets, carry anti-ship weapons, and perform nuclear-related missions in France's broader doctrine. But without dedicated electronic attack aircraft, French operations against the most heavily defended environments would be more difficult. That is why coalition warfare matters again. In a high-end conflict, French Rafales would not necessarily fly alone into the teeth of a Chinese missile defense network. They could operate as part of a larger allied force, supported by American electronic warfare, submarines, surveillance aircraft, cyber operations, and space-based assets. This is not romantic. It is practical. No modern navy wants to fight alone against a major power if it does not have to. Even the United States builds coalitions because mass and geography matter. France brings quality, America brings scale. Together, they create a more flexible problem for any adversary. This is what can unsettle China. Not because China is weak. China is not weak. Its navy has grown at extraordinary speed. It now has the world's largest navy by number of ships, though not by every measure of capability. Its shipyards produce destroyers, frigates, amphibious ships, submarines, and carriers at a pace that alarms Western planners. Its carrier program is advancing from ski jump designs toward catapult operations, especially with Fujian, which represents a major step in Chinese naval aviation. Beijing wants blue water power. It wants carriers that can protect distant interests, pressure neighbors, and challenge American dominance. But carrier aviation is not learned overnight. Building the hull is one challenge. Mastering the air wing is another. Creating safe flight deck culture, night operations, maintenance cycles, pilot training, command networks, and combat integration takes time. The United States has spent generations perfecting this art. France, though smaller, has also spent decades inside the catapult carrier world. That experience gives the West a knowledge advantage, and when American and French forces train together, they reinforce that advantage. Cross-deck operations are especially symbolic. When Allied aircraft land on each other's carriers, even in limited ways, it shows trust and compatibility. It shows that procedures are not just theoretical. It shows that pilots, deck crews, and commanders can adapt. In war, this kind of flexibility can save lives. A damaged carrier might need to recover aircraft from an ally. A pilot low on fuel might need another deck. A coalition strike package might need emergency options. The more allies practice together, the harder they are to break apart. And that is exactly the kind of resilience China must factor into its planning. Pause for a second and think about the human side. A carrier is not just a machine, it is a moving city of pressure. Thousands of sailors live inside metal corridors surrounded by jet fuel, weapons, reactors, spinning machinery, and the constant danger of the sea. On the flight deck, young crew members work close to roaring engines and moving aircraft. A mistake can kill someone in seconds. At night, the deck becomes a storm of lights, noise, wind, and signals. Pilots return tired, sometimes after hours of tension, and must land on a strip of steel that looks impossibly small. This is why naval aviation creates a special kind of culture. It demands discipline. It demands trust. It demands repetition until fear becomes focus. When France chose to operate a catapult nuclear carrier, it chose this hard path. It could have built an easier ship. It could have accepted a simpler form of naval aviation. Instead, it chose the difficult standard. That choice is why the Charles de Gaulle matters today, and it is why the next French carrier matters even more. France is planning a future nuclear aircraft carrier, often discussed as the PANG, the next generation carrier. It is expected to be larger than the Charles de Gaulle and designed for future aircraft and systems. The exact future may change with budgets, politics, and technology, but the direction is clear. France does not intend to leave the carrier club. It wants to remain one of the few nations able to operate a nuclear-powered carrier with catapult launch capability. For China, that means the Western carrier network may not shrink as quickly as some hope. Yes, European defense has problems. Yes, shipbuilding can be slow. Yes, ammunition stocks and maintenance capacity have become serious concerns across the West. Yes, political unity is never guaranteed. But the core naval knowledge is still alive. And when the United States, France, Britain, Japan, Australia, India, and other partners increase coordination, the maritime balance becomes far more complicated than counting ships on a chart. If you have watched this far, you are not just scrolling anymore, you are tracking the real chessboard. So write deck in the comments if you understand why one carrier can change a whole region, subscribe for the next deep dive, and share this with someone who still thinks China only worries about the US Navy. Now, we need to be honest about the phrase China in a panic. Great powers do not panic like ordinary people. They calculate, they test, they prepare. But military planners can become deeply concerned when their assumptions are challenged. China's strategy depends partly on the belief that it can raise the cost of Western intervention. If the cost becomes too high, maybe America hesitates. If America hesitates, maybe regional allies doubt. If allies doubt, maybe China gains room to move. But Allied carrier capability pushes in the other direction. It says the West can distribute risk. It says pressure can come from multiple directions. It says the United States is not the only actor with long-range naval aviation. It says a conflict in Asia could bring consequences across multiple theaters. That is the nightmare for any power trying to control a regional crisis. The more actors involved, the harder escalation becomes to manage. France also brings nuclear status into the political background. The Charles de Gaulle itself is not simply a floating nuclear weapon platform in the way some imagine, but France's military identity is tied to nuclear deterrence. That gives French decisions a certain seriousness. When a nuclear-armed state sends a carrier group into a contested region, it is not a casual gesture. It is a signal from a country with strategic weight. And because France sometimes acts independently of Washington, its presence cannot be dismissed as just another American move. That independence can be irritating for the United States at times. French leaders often talk about European strategic autonomy. They do not want Europe to be completely dependent on American decisions. But here's the irony. The most effective form of European autonomy at sea may be the kind that remains compatible with American power. Pure independence sounds strong in speeches, but in a real high-end naval conflict, isolation is weakness. A carrier that cannot communicate, coordinate, refuel, rearm, share data, or operate with allies becomes a lonely target. So the smartest path is not total separation. It is sovereign capability inside an allied network. That is what the Charles de Gaulle represents. France can act alone when needed, but when the storm becomes too large, it can join a larger Western formation. This is not dependence in the simple sense. It is strategic symbiosis, two sides gaining from each other. America gains an ally with a rare nuclear carrier capability. France gains access to training, procedures, and a wider combat ecosystem. NATO gains depth. China faces a more complex maritime picture. And smaller countries watching from the sidelines see that the West is not just one flag. It is a group of states that, despite arguments and political drama, can still combine force when interests align. That last point matters. The West often looks divided. Elections change policy, leaders argue, defense budgets rise and fall, public opinion shifts. But military institutions can preserve cooperation beneath the noise. Pilots still train, ships still exercise, officers still build habits of working together. Technical standards still matter. And when crisis comes, those quiet years of training can suddenly become the difference between confusion and action. This is the hidden architecture of power, not the speech, not the photo opportunity, the procedure, the cable, the radio call, the shared landing pattern, the compatible fuel system, the officer who already knows how the ally thinks. This is why China studies exercises so closely. Exercises are not just theater. They reveal the future shape of war. When French and American carrier groups operate together, they are rehearsing options. They are showing adversaries that Allied forces can connect across oceans. They are reminding everyone that the sea is not owned by the country with the nearest coastline. And they are proving that even a smaller carrier can have strategic impact if it sits inside the right network. Still, the Charles de Gaulle is not invincible. No carrier is. Modern missiles are faster, smarter, and more numerous than ever. Submarines remain terrifying threats. Drones are changing naval surveillance. Hypersonic weapons may compress decision time. Cyber attacks can target communications and logistics. A carrier group must defend itself across air, sea, undersea, space, and digital domains. This is expensive and exhausting. The age of sending a carrier close to shore without fear is over. Any carrier moving near a major power enters a danger zone. But carriers survive by mobility, defense layers, deception, distance, and offensive reach. They do not need to sit on an enemy's doorstep to matter. They can shape behavior from far away. They can force the enemy to search, track, and allocate weapons. They can support allies, control sea lanes, and create uncertainty. A carrier at sea is a moving problem, and a nuclear carrier is a problem that can keep moving for a long time. For China, the most uncomfortable part is not that France has one carrier. It is that France proves the American model can be shared by another Western nuclear power. That means China's future carrier force will not only be compared with the U.S. Navy, it will be measured against a wider tradition of Western naval aviation. The French experience shows that even a medium-sized power can preserve high-end carrier skills if it commits enough money, training, and political will. That is a message to allies as much as adversaries. It tells Japan, India, Britain, Australia, and others that maritime power is not just about matching America, ship for ship. It is about building pieces that fit together, a submarine here, a carrier there, a destroyer screen, a logistics hub, a radar network, a missile battery, a secure port, a training relationship. Piece by piece, a coalition becomes stronger than any one country's order of battle suggests. This is the real reason the U.S.-France naval bond matters. It is not sentimental. It is structural. The American fleet is the center of gravity, but France adds a rare second nuclear carrier voice to the Western world. That gives Washington more diplomatic flexibility. It gives Europe more relevance. It gives Indo-Pacific partners another serious navy to work with. And it forces China to plan for a wider set of scenarios. In peacetime, the Charles de Gaulle can visit ports, join exercises, reassure partners, and collect experience. In crisis, it can move aircraft, command attention, and complicate enemy calculations. In war, it could support strikes, air defense, surveillance, and coalition operations. Even if it never fires a shot in a great power conflict, its existence shapes decisions before the shooting starts. That is what deterrence means. The best weapon is often the one that makes the enemy pause, not because it guarantees victory alone, but because it adds risk. And risk is the language strategic planners understand. So when people say it is only one French carrier, they are missing the point. One carrier can be a symbol, one carrier can be a school, one carrier can be a diplomatic tool. One carrier can be a command node. One carrier can be the proof that a nation still has the will to project power. And when that one carrier is nuclear powered, catapult equipped, and interoperable with the United States Navy, it becomes much more than a national showpiece. It becomes a piece of the Western maritime shield. The story of the Charles de Gaulle is also a warning. Power is not built quickly. France did not wake up one morning and suddenly gain carrier aviation. It took decades of investment, mistakes, delays, training, and political persistence. America did not become the master of carrier warfare by accident. It learned through war, loss, industry, and relentless practice. China is now trying to climb that same mountain at high speed. The question is not whether China can build impressive ships. The question is whether it can build the full living system around those ships. Pilots, deck crews, maintenance culture, combat experience, allied networks, global logistics, trust under pressure. That is much harder. And that is where the United States and France still hold an advantage. Their carrier relationship is not perfect. It is real. It has been tested at sea. It has been refined through operations. And it gives the West a rare tool at a time when the oceans are becoming dangerous again. In the end, China is not afraid of the Charles de Gaulle as a single ship. China is concerned about what it represents: a Europe that can still sail far from home, a France that refuses to become strategically silent, an America that can still build coalitions, a Western naval culture that knows how to launch aircraft from moving decks, and a future where any attempt to dominate the Indo-Pacific may face not one navy, but a connected wall of allied power. That is the real panic point, not the size of the hull, not the name on the stern, not the number of aircraft. The real fear is connection. Because a connected fleet is harder to isolate. A connected fleet is harder to intimidate. A connected fleet can lose one piece and keep fighting. And in the cold mathematics of naval strategy, that may be the difference between control and chaos. So the next time you see the Charles de Gaulle sailing beside an American carrier, do not see a small ship beside a giant. See a signal. See a warning. See a nuclear-powered reminder that the ocean is still the world's greatest chessboard, and that on this chessboard, the most dangerous piece is not always the largest one. Sometimes it is the piece that connects the whole game.